melody was impossible. Vivian Shaw stopped dead in the silent, polished hallway of Harrington Academy. It was past 10 at night, the air still and sterile. Every student, every teacher was long gone. The only sound should have been the low hum of the building's climate control. But this was a piano, her daughter's piano. She knew Ilara's playing by heart, technical, precise, but always cold, like a perfect machine reciting notes. This was different. The music drifting from the open doorway of the music room was hesitant, fragile, and filled with a sorrow so profound it made the air in the hallway feel heavy. It was a sound Vivian had never heard her daughter make. A flash of annoyance tightened her jaw. She had left Ilara in there 2 hours ago with a thermos of tea and her Braille sheet music, while she chaired a late-night emergency board meeting in the Nexus Innovate Conference Suite, a sleek, glass-walled annex her company had funded. The nanny had canceled at the last minute, a sick child of her own, forcing Vivian to bring Ilara along. It wasn't ideal, but the music room was a controlled environment. Safe, quiet. It was not, however, supposed to be occupied by anyone else. She strode toward the light spilling into the hall, her heels clicking with sharp authority, ready to dismiss whoever had disturbed her daughter's practice. But as she reached the doorway, the sight inside made the breath catch in her throat. There was Ilara, her blind daughter sitting at the grand piano. Her usual stiff, perfect posture was gone. Her shoulders were relaxed, her head tilted as if listening to a secret. But she wasn't alone. Seated beside her on the bench, his back partially to the door, was the janitor. He wore the drab gray uniform of the school's maintenance staff, his presence a stark contrast to the room's polished grandeur. He was whispering something, his voice a low, soothing rumble, and as he spoke, Ilara played a chord that shimmered with a feeling Vivian didn't know her daughter possessed. "Don't think about the notes, Ilara," the man said softly. "Think of a color. What does that sound like to you? For me, this one. This one sounds like the gray of the sky just before it rains." Ilara's small fingers pressed the keys again, and the chord was softer this time, melancholic. "It's lonely," she whispered. "It can be," the janitor agreed, "but lonely isn't always sad. Sometimes it's just quiet, waiting." "Try the next one." Vivian stood frozen in the darkness of the hall, a powerful CEO reduced to a spy. She watched the man's large, work-roughened hand hover near Ilara's, never touching, but guiding her through presence alone. He wasn't teaching her technique. Her expensive, hand-picked tutors did that, drilling scales and timing into her until all the life was gone. This man was teaching her feeling. He was translating music into a language of sense and memory, a language her daughter was fluent in. For a moment, Vivian's instinct was to stride in, to reclaim control, to demand an explanation. This was a breach of protocol, a security risk, but she remained rooted to the spot, held captive by the scene. She had spent a fortune on therapists, on specialists, on the best instructors in the country, all in a desperate attempt to coax her withdrawn daughter out of her shell. She'd bought her the finest piano, enrolled her in the most prestigious school, and scheduled every minute of her life to foster a talent that might give her joy. Yet nothing had worked. Ilara remained a beautiful, perfectly tuned instrument that no one knew how to play. And here was the janitor, a man whose name she didn't even know, unlocking a part of her daughter's soul she had never been allowed to see. "Now, feel the wood under your fingers," he murmured. "The keys are old. They've been played by hundreds of students. They hold stories. Can you feel them?" Ilara nodded, her expression rapt. "They're tired," he chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the vast room. "They are. But they always have one more song in them." Just like people, Vivian felt a strange, unwelcome ache in her chest. She hadn't heard Ilara speak with such unguarded honesty in years. With her, every conversation was a careful negotiation, a minefield of unspoken rules. With this stranger, her daughter was simply present. The lesson, if it could be called that, continued for another 10 minutes. He didn't correct Ilara's mistakes. Instead, he'd ask her what a wrong note felt like. "A surprise," she'd say. "Like a step that isn't there." And he'd nod, understanding completely. Finally, he glanced at the large clock on the wall. "All right, I think that's enough stories for one night. Your mom will be finishing her work soon. Will you be here tomorrow?" Ilara asked, her voice small. "I'm always here," he said. "This old place doesn't clean itself." He helped her gather her sheet music, his movements gentle and efficient. Vivian quickly stepped back, melting into the shadows of the unlit corridor as the janitor pushed his large yellow cleaning cart out of a nearby supply closet. He walked with Ilara to the main entrance of the music wing, waiting with her until Vivian's assistant, a young, perpetually nervous woman named Claire, arrived to collect her. "She's all set, ma'am," the janitor said to Claire, his tone respectful but distant. He didn't look at Ilara with pity or sentimentality. He looked at her like she was just a kid who liked to play the piano. As they walked away, Vivian heard her daughter's voice, clear and sure, say, "Good night, Mr. Fallon." He smiled. "Good night, Ilara." Vivian remained in the shadows until he had disappeared down the opposite hall with his cart, the squeak of its wheels slowly fading into silence. She walked back to the conference suite, her mind a whirlwind. Fallon. His name was Fallon. She sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, the dozen empty chairs like silent accusers. Her multi-million-dollar acquisition proposal lay on the tablet in front of her, its complex figures and projections suddenly meaningless. All she could see was the image of a janitor in a gray uniform, sitting beside her blind daughter, teaching her how to hear the color of rain. And for the first time in a very long time, Vivian Shaw felt a terrifying loss of control. She had to know who this man was. Not just his name. She had to know everything. The drive home was silent. Ilara sat in the back of the sleek black sedan, her small form barely making an impression on the expensive leather seat. She was quiet, but it was a different quiet than usual. Not the tense, brittle silence Vivian was accustomed to, but something softer, more contemplative. Vivian glanced at her daughter in the rear-view mirror, her mind replaying the scene from the music room. "Did you have a good practice session, Ilara?" Vivian asked, her voice carefully neutral. "It was fine," Ilara replied, the standard, non-committal answer. "Mrs. Gable said you were making excellent progress on the Bach partita." A slight pause. "Yes, it's very structured." Vivian waited, hoping for more. Hoping for a mention of a kindly janitor, of songs that sounded like rain. Nothing came. The wall between them was back in place, as solid and impenetrable as ever. Ilara was keeping him a secret. The realization sent a complicated chill through Vivian. It wasn't just a simple act of kindness she had witnessed. It was a conspiracy, a tiny rebellion plotted in whispers over the keys of a piano. The next morning, Vivian was in her office on the 50th floor of the Nexus Tower before the sun had fully risen over the city. She didn't look at the panoramic view. Her focus was on a single, encrypted email she was typing. The recipient was Donovan, the discreet and unnervingly efficient head of her corporate security team. "Donovan," the message read, "I need a comprehensive background report on a staff member at Harrington Academy. Name is Reese Fallon. He's on the custodial team. Frame it as a routine security audit for all non-faculty personnel." "I want to know everything. Employment history, education, family, financials, everything. I need the preliminary findings by end of day." She hit send, the click of the key echoing in the vast, silent office. It was an abuse of power, a violation of privacy, and she felt not a flicker of guilt. She was a woman who dealt in data, and Reese Fallon was now the most compelling variable in her life. Her 10 o'clock meeting was with Marcus Alcott, the new headmaster of Harrington Academy. He was a man who seemed assembled from a catalog of expensive Ivy League accessories, perfect teeth, a watch worth more than a car, and an ambition so sharp you could almost see it glinting off his polished shoes. He greeted Vivian with a practiced warmth that never quite reached his eyes. "Vivian, a pleasure," he said, gesturing to a chair in his needlessly large office. "Thank you for making the time. I know what the CEO of a company like Nexus Innovate deals with daily." "The school is a priority investment, Marcus," she said, cutting through the pleasantries. "What's on the agenda?" Alcott's smile widened. "The Founders Gala. It's in 8 weeks, and this year, I want it to be spectacular. We're courting the Henderson Foundation for a new science wing, and I want to put on a show that reminds them why Harrington is the premier preparatory academy in the state." He slid a glossy brochure across his desk. "And to that end, I was hoping Alara would perform." Vivian looked at him. "She performs at the winter recital every year." "Yes, but this is different. I don't want a simple student performance. I want a showpiece, the centerpiece of the evening. We have her listed in the program as a prodigy. I want her to play something that proves it, something breathtaking." The pressure was immediate and unwelcome. Alcott wasn't asking as an educator. He was leveraging her daughter as a fundraising tool. It was a game Vivian understood, and one she usually played better than anyone. But today, the thought of Alara on a stage, playing a technically flawless but emotionally empty piece for a room of investors, felt wrong. "I'll speak with her tutor," Vivian said noncommittally. "Excellent," Alcott beamed. "We're all counting on her." "On you." As she was leaving, a janitor pushed a cleaning cart down the hall. Vivian's entire body went rigid, but it was an older man, stout and gray-haired. Not him. The disappointment was sharp and unexpected. Later that afternoon, an alert pinged on her laptop. It was the preliminary file from Donovan. She opened the encrypted attachment. Subject: Fallon Reese. Age: 42. Status: single, widowed. Dependents: one son, Leo Fallon, age 11. Attends Northwood Public Middle School. Residence: 23B Orchard Apartments, West District. Employment: custodial staff, Harrington Academy, 5 years. Prior employment. Vivian leaned closer to the screen. The section was almost blank. It listed a few odd jobs, a warehouse stocker, a short-lived stint at a landscaping company. But before that, there was a gap. A 5-year chasm in his professional life. And the records from before that gap were heavily redacted. There was a single cryptic note from Donovan's analyst. Subject appears to have a former professional license, now inactive. Records are sealed by court order, citing a private family tragedy, a sealed record. A family tragedy. Vivian's mind raced. This wasn't some simple man who happened to be kind to her daughter. He was a puzzle. A man actively hiding from who he used to be. The mystery deepened, and with it, her resolve. She looked at her calendar, at the back-to-back meetings and international calls that filled her life. With a decisive click, she cleared her entire evening schedule. She sent a text to her assistant. "Claire, cancel my dinner engagement and let Mrs. Gable know that Alara will need to stay late for an extended practice session tonight. I'll be working from the annex and will pick her up myself." She told herself it was a logical next step in her investigation. A CEO gathering data before making a decision. But as she drove towards the school in the late afternoon traffic, she knew it was something more. She wasn't just investigating the janitor. She was going back to watch him, to understand the secret he shared with her daughter, a secret that was communicated not in words, but in the spaces between the notes of a sad, beautiful song. The school was a different creature at night. The daytime cacophony of bells, chatter, and running feet was replaced by a profound, humming silence. Vivian sat in the starkly modern conference room, a laptop open in front of her, displaying market analytics she wasn't actually reading. Her entire consciousness was focused on the building around her, listening for the faint, telltale notes of a piano. Around 9:30, it began. A simple, questioning melody, like a single drop of water in a quiet pool. She moved silently through the deserted hallways, her expensive shoes making no sound on the freshly buffed floors. She didn't stop at the doorway this time. An adjacent classroom, used for art history, was unlocked. She slipped inside, the darkness providing perfect cover. From her new vantage point, she had a clear, oblique view into the music room. Tonight, they weren't on the bench. Reese had Alara standing on the wide oak floorboards in her stocking feet. "Forget the keys for a minute," he was saying. "Music isn't just in your fingers, it's in your feet. It's in your bones. This piece, the one you're working on, it has a heartbeat. Can you feel it?" He tapped out a slow, steady rhythm on the polished wood of the piano lid. Thump, 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 thump. Alara stood perfectly still, her head cocked. "It's slow." "It is," Reese agreed. "It's the heartbeat of someone walking, not running. Someone who is thinking about something important. Now, walk with it. Feel the vibration come up from the floor." Vivian watched, mesmerized, as her daughter began to pace the room, her steps hesitant at first, then falling into perfect time with the rhythm Reese was tapping. He started humming the melody, a low, resonant sound. A small, tentative smile touched Alara's lips. She was no longer a student practicing an instrument. She was a participant in the music itself. He was giving her a way to see the song through feeling. After a few minutes, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. With a quiet apology to Alara, he pulled it out. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice instantly transformed. The quiet instructor was gone, replaced by a father. The warmth in his tone was so palpable Vivian could feel it across the empty space between them. "Yeah, I know it's getting late. Just a little longer. Did you finish the history worksheet? All of it? Good man. Okay, 20 minutes, I promise. Love you too." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, but the spell was momentarily broken. A life outside these walls had intruded. A son, a worksheet, a promise. For the first time, Vivian saw Reese not as a mystery, but as a man torn between two responsibilities. A man living a life of quiet, weary dedication. He was a single father, just like she was a single mother. The thought was strangely disarming. He led Alara back to the piano. "All right, let's try it again. But this time, when you play, remember that heartbeat. Play it with your feet." The difference was staggering. The notes, which had been so sterile and disconnected under Mrs. Gable's tutelage, now had a pulse. They flowed with a grace and emotional weight that Vivian had never imagined possible. As the final note faded, Reese needed to grab a cloth from his cart in the hallway to wipe down the keys. As he stepped out of the music room, his shadow fell across the art history classroom's open door. Vivian's heart leaped into her throat. She instinctively flattened herself against the wall behind a row of plaster busts, the cold, blank eyes of a Roman emperor staring past her. Reese paused for a second in the hall, listening to the building's silence, before continuing to his cart. The near miss left Vivian breathless, her knuckles white where she gripped her phone. She felt a flush of adrenaline, the thrill of a secret observer on the verge of being discovered. The next afternoon, she understood the true cost of failure. She sat in on Alara's official lesson with Mrs. Gable, a woman with a conservatory pedigree and the patience of a metronome. They were working on the demanding list piece Alcott wanted for the gala. "No, Alara," Mrs. Gable snapped, her voice sharp. "The timing. You're dragging the allegro. It must be precise. From the top!" Alara's shoulders tensed. She began again, her fingers flying across the keys in a technically perfect but utterly lifeless cascade of notes. "Better," Mrs. Gable conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But there is no feeling. You are a gifted child, Alara, but you play like an automaton. You must connect with the composer's intent. I don't know what he intended. Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper. Then you must study, the woman retorted, rapping her pencil on the sheet music. It's all here. The notations, the dynamics. It is a formula, not a guessing game. Vivian watched her daughter shrink on the bench, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. The joy, the tentative smile Vivian had seen the night before, was gone, replaced by a familiar mask of anxious obedience. The lesson ended with Ilara so frustrated she refused to play another note. That was the moment Vivian's objective shifted. This was no longer a passive investigation into a curious anomaly. It was a rescue mission. Her daughter's spirit was the prize, and the sterile by-the-book methods of the world she had built for her were failing. The janitor, with his talk of heartbeats and rainy-day colors, was succeeding. She couldn't let Alcott's ambition or Mrs. Gable's rigid pedagogy destroy the one spark of light she had seen in her daughter. She had the data. She had seen the results. Now she needed to act. Driving home, she formulated a plan. A direct confrontation was too risky. He could deny everything, and she would expose herself as a spy. An anonymous tip to the headmaster was out of the question. Alcott would fire him immediately for crossing a line with a student. No, the approach had to be her own. It had to be controlled, precise, and executed on her terms. She would create an encounter, an accidental discovery. She would find a way to make him play. Then, and only then, would she have the leverage she needed. The plan required precision, timing, and a touch of theatricality. 3 things Vivian excelled at. She arrived at Harrington the following evening an hour earlier than usual, Ilara in tow. Reese's shift didn't officially start until 7, but she knew he often came in early to prep his supplies. I have a series of calls with our Tokyo office I can't reschedule, Vivian announced to Ilara, her voice a carefully crafted mix of apology and authority. I'm going to have to take them from here. You can get a head start on your practice. She settled not in the annex, but in a small office directly across from the music room, leaving the door open. She needed to be a visible, plausible presence. She set Ilara up at the piano with her Braille music and, more importantly, the printed score for Mrs. Gable, which she placed precariously on the edge of the piano lid. Next to it, she set down a bottle of mineral water. For an hour, Vivian pretended to work, her ears straining for the telltale squeak of a custodial cart. Ilara practiced, the notes of the Liszt piece sounding as strained and unhappy as she felt. At 7:10, Vivian heard him, the rhythmic, gentle bump of his cart approaching down the main corridor. It was time. She stood up, walked into the music room, and began the performance. Ilara, sweetheart, could you just move this for me? She asked, gesturing toward the printed music. As Ilara reached for it, Vivian, with the calculated clumsiness of a stage magician, knocked the water bottle. It tipped over, a clear, silent arc of water soaking the expensive, cream-colored paper. Oh! Vivian gasped, her voice sharp with feigned alarm. Oh goodness, Ilara, I am so sorry! She snatched up the dripping pages. The ink was already blurring, the thick paper warping. It's ruined. Completely ruined. Mrs. Gable is going to be furious Ilara's face fell. We can dry it. No, look, the notes are running together. It's unreadable. Vivian made a show of dabbing at the pages with a tissue, making it worse. It was in the middle of this manufactured crisis that Reese Fallon appeared in the open doorway. Is everything all right, Miss Shaw? He asked, his eyes taking in the scene. Vivian looked up, letting a flicker of desperate frustration show. Mr. Fallon? No, not really. I've had an accident. I've destroyed my daughter's sheet music for the Founders Gala. She held up the soggy pages as evidence. Her tutor will be livid. Reese nodded, his expression polite but unreadable. I'm sorry to hear that. Perhaps the office has another copy. This was the master copy Mrs. Gable was working from. Vivian lied smoothly. And I can't read music myself to help her. Not a single note. She let out a frustrated sigh and then paused, looking at Reese as if a wild, improbable idea had just struck her. "You're here every night," she began, her tone shifting, becoming more intimate, more conspiratorial. "You must hear the students playing constantly. I know this is a long shot, but do you know this piece? At all?" Reese's posture stiffened. A guarded, shuttered look came over his face. "Ma'am, I just clean the floors. I wouldn't know anything about Liszt." "Of course not," Vivian said quickly, appearing to back down. "It was a silly thought." She turned back to Alara, whose face was a mask of disappointment. "I suppose we'll just have to pack it in for tonight." The silence that followed was heavy. Vivian knew this was the critical moment. She had to apply precisely the right amount of pressure. It was Alara who unknowingly sealed the trap. "Please, Mr. Fallon," she asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Mrs. Gable said I have to get the beginning right. It sounds like a storm." Reese looked at Alara, and for the first time, Vivian saw the professional mask of the janitor crack. He saw a child's distress, and his instinct to help was stronger than his instinct to hide. He glanced at Vivian, then back at the piano, his expression a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "I might know a few bars," he mumbled, the words sounding like they were being dragged from him. "From hearing the kids play." "Would you?" Vivian pressed, her voice soft but firm. "Just to get her started." "It would be an immense help." He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he walked to the piano. He didn't sit on the bench next to Alara, but stood, leaning over the keys. He slowly flexed his right hand, a gesture so quick Vivian almost missed it. A wince, a ghost of a long-dead pain. He placed his hands on the keys. The first few notes were clumsy, uncertain. He was playing the part of a janitor who'd picked up a tune by ear. Then, his eyes closed. The pretense fell away. His fingers, which Vivian had only seen holding a mop handle or a wrench, began to move with a fluid, startling grace. The music that poured from the piano was not just the melody. It was the storm. He played with a power and a passion that vibrated through the floor. It was a performance filled with a fierce, aching beauty, a story of loss and longing told in a cascade of brilliant, angry notes. He was no longer in the room. He was somewhere else entirely, lost in a memory that was both beautiful and agonizing. He played for nearly a minute before he seemed to wake up. He stopped abruptly, his hands hovering over the keys as the final, thunderous chord echoed into silence. He stared at his own fingers as if they were traitors. Then he slowly looked up at Vivian. The janitor was gone. In his place was a man who had been caught, exposed, his deepest secret laid bare under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the music room. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a look of pure panic. Vivian met his gaze. She manufactured a look of astonishment, of breathless surprise. But inside, a cold, sharp thrill of victory shot through her. The variable was solved. The puzzle was unlocked. She had him. The silence in the room was a living thing, stretched taut between the janitor's panic and the CEO's calculated surprise. Reese snatched his hands back from the piano keys as if they were red hot, his face ashen. He took a half step back, physically retreating into the persona he had so carefully constructed. I have to get back to my duties, Miss Shaw," he stammered, his voice tight. He wouldn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the floor. "The West Wing still needs to be cleaned." "Mr. Fallon," Vivian said, her voice dropping the feigned astonishment and picking up a sharp, executive edge. "Let's not be ridiculous. That was not the performance of a man who knows a few bars. You're not just a janitor, are you?" "That's exactly what I am," he insisted, his words clipped. He grabbed the handle of his cleaning cart, his knuckles white. It was an anchor, a physical reminder of who he was supposed to be now. "I'm the janitor." I was out of line. It won't happen again. He tried to leave, but Vivian moved, blocking his path. She was shorter than him, but her presence seemed to fill the doorway. "I don't care about your story, Mr. Fallon." "Not yet," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But I know what I just heard, and I know what my daughter needs. She doesn't need another technician like Mrs. Gable, drilling the joy out of her. She needs a teacher, someone who understands that music is more than black dots on a page. She needs you." He flinched as if she had struck him. "No. I will pay you, of course," Vivian continued, ignoring his refusal. She named a figure, an astronomical sum for a few weeks of tutoring, more than he likely made in a year. "Cash. Off the books. No one needs to know. You can continue your duties. Just meet with her for an hour each night. Prepare her for the gala." Reese finally met her eyes, and what she saw there was not greed or temptation, but a deep, unyielding pain. "Miss Shaw, you don't understand. I can't. I don't do that anymore." His voice was low, ragged with an emotion she couldn't yet parse. "The answer is no. Please, let me get back to my work." His refusal was absolute. It wasn't a negotiation tactic. It was a brick wall. For the first time that evening, Vivian felt her control slip. Money, her most reliable tool, had failed. He turned and pushed his cart down the hall, the squeak of the wheels a sound of defiant retreat. The next afternoon, Reese was focused on his real job, being a father. He sat on a worn park bench, watching his son, Leo, kick a soccer ball against a brick wall. Leo was a good kid, bright, a bit quiet, with his father's thoughtful eyes. But for the past few weeks, a shadow had been hanging over him. "Something on your mind, buddy?" Reese asked when Leo finally flopped onto the bench beside him, breathing hard. Leo shrugged, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "It's nothing." "Doesn't look like nothing," Reese pressed gently. "Trouble at school?" Leo was silent for a long moment. "Some of the guys, they're just jerks." "What guys?" "Liam and his friends," Leo mumbled. "His dad is on the board of some big company. He goes to that school where you work sometimes." Reese felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew who Liam was. He'd seen him at Harrington, a boy who walked the halls with the casual arrogance of inherited wealth. "What are they doing, Leo?" Leo finally looked up, his eyes shimmering. They say stuff." "About you," his voice cracked. "They say you clean toilets for rich kids. They call you the mop man. Liam told everyone my dad was his servant." The words hit Reese harder than any physical blow. The shame, the anonymity he had chosen for himself, was never supposed to splash onto his son. He had quit his former life to protect his family from pain, only to find it had followed them in a new, uglier form. He pulled his son into a hug, his heart aching. "What they say doesn't matter, Leo." "You know that I know," Leo whispered into his father's shoulder. "But it's hard when they say it every day." Meanwhile, Vivian was pivoting. Her first strategy had failed, but failure was just a data point that demanded a new approach. She placed another call to Donovan. "The preliminary report on Fallon isn't enough," she said, her voice sharp. "The sealed record. I need to know what's in it. I don't care what it takes or what it costs. Find a way. That could have legal ramifications, Ms. Shaw." Donovan's calm voice replied through the speaker. "That's what I pay you to manage," she retorted. But she knew that might take time. She needed a more immediate form of leverage. He had refused money. What then was his currency? Her mind went back to the phone call she'd overheard, the warmth in his voice. "Love you too." His son. "Donovan," she said, her mind already assembling the pieces. "His son Leo. What can you tell me about him?" "He's 11, attends Northwood Public, gets good grades, seems like a normal kid." "Dig deeper," Vivian commanded. "Friends, social life, any problems he's having. I want to know what this man's weak spot is. Every fortress has a gate. I want you to find it." As she hung up, she felt a line being crossed. This was no longer about her daughter's piano lessons. It was a strategic campaign, and she was targeting a man's child to get to the father. A part of her, small and distant, recoiled at the thought, but the image of Alara's face, frustrated and miserable at her lesson with Mrs. Gable, pushed it away. This was a zero-sum game. For her daughter to win, Reese Fallon had to lose. She would find his gate, and she would break it down. 2 days later, the gate was found. The report from Donovan was waiting in Vivian's inbox, a model of sterile efficiency. It detailed the bullying at Northwood Public with cold, dispassionate facts, naming Liam Alistair as the ringleader. But it was the final section of the report that made Vivian's breath catch. Note: subject's son, Leo Fallon, has demonstrated considerable artistic talent. He was a finalist in last year's citywide youth art competition. Northwood has a highly competitive feeder program, the Rising Stars Academy, offering full scholarships for gifted students in arts and music. The application deadline for this year's intake was last Friday. The Fallon boy did not apply. There it was. The key, a future for his son that was just out of reach. Vivian closed the file. The strategy was no longer theoretical. She now had the weapon and the ammunition. She found Reese that evening in the sub-level of the academy, a cavernous, concrete space that housed the school's heating and ventilation systems. The rhythmic thrum of the machinery provided a low, intimidating hum. He was replacing a filter on a large air-handling unit, his back to her. He didn't hear her approach. "Mr. Fallon," she said. Her voice, cutting through the mechanical noise, made him startle, dropping his wrench with a loud clatter. He turned, his face immediately guarded when he saw her. "Miss Shaw, you shouldn't be down here. It's not safe. We need to talk," she said, ignoring his warning. She didn't wait for his permission. She simply began. "I know about what's happening at your son's school. I know about the bullying, about Liam Alistair and his friends." The color drained from Reese's face. It was one thing for his son to confess to him in the privacy of a park. It was another for this powerful, intrusive woman to speak of it here, in the bowels of the school, like it was a line item on a business report. It was a violation. "That is none of your concern," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'm making it my concern," Vivian countered, stepping closer. "I know about the Rising Stars Academy at Northwood. A full scholarship for your son. A chance to be in an environment where he'll be celebrated, not ridiculed. A chance to get away from boys like Liam. I imagine that's something you want for him." Reese's jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle jumped. "The deadline has passed." "Deadlines are for people who don't have my phone number," Vivian said coolly. "The head of the admissions board, Robert Carlyle, sits on the advisory council for one of my company's philanthropic ventures. A single phone call from me, and the deadline for Leo is no longer an issue. Another call, and I can have a private art tutor, the best in the city, at your apartment tomorrow to help him build a portfolio that will guarantee his acceptance. I can give him this, Reese." She used his first name. It was a deliberate move, an act of forced intimacy, of ownership. He stared at her, his expression a storm of fury and dawning, helpless horror. He saw the trap before she had even finished setting it. "And what do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. Here it was. The price. "You know what I want," she said, her voice dropping, becoming as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "You will teach my daughter. You will meet her 3 times a week and prepare her for the Founders Gala. You will unlock whatever it is you do that makes her play. And you will ensure she gives a performance that Marcus Alcott can only dream of. You will not breathe a word of this arrangement to a soul. You will be a janitor to the world, and you will be her teacher in secret." She paused, letting the weight of the offer settle in the humming, mechanical air. "You give me what I want for my daughter, and I will give your son the future you can't afford." It was a devastating choice. A brutal, soul-crushing transaction. Everything in him screamed to tell her to go to hell, to throw her offer back in her impossibly arrogant face. The thought of sitting at that piano again, of willingly walking back into the world that had shattered him, was physically nauseating. But then, the image of Leo's face, streaked with tears in the park, flashed in his mind. They call you the mop man. He was being asked to trade his own personal hell for his son's happiness. It was no choice at all. A father's love was a currency more powerful than any dollar figure she could have named. He looked at this woman, at her perfect suit, her unwavering gaze, and he felt a profound, bottomless hatred. But he also felt beaten. She had found his gate, and she had, as promised, broken it down. "Fine," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He felt something inside him break. For Leo. "I'll do it. I knew you'd be reasonable," Vivian said, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "But we do this my way," Reese added, his voice gaining a hard, defiant edge. He was trying to claw back a shred of dignity. "No talk of technique, no schedules from Mrs. Gable. I teach Alara how I teach her." Those are the terms. Vivian considered it for a moment, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Agreed." The deal was struck. A dark pact made in the thrumming heart of the academy. Vivian turned to leave, her mission accomplished. But as she walked away, the look in Reese's eyes, a look of pure, agonizing sacrifice, lingered in her mind. She had won. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. So why did her victory feel so much like a loss? The first lesson under their new arrangement was a ghost of what it had been. The warmth was gone, replaced by a strained, chilling formality. Reese was punctual, efficient, and distant. He spoke only when necessary, his instructions precise, but devoid of the stories and colors that had once filled the room. He was a machine executing a program, and the music they made was as hollow as the pact that bound them. Alara felt the shift immediately. She sat at the piano, her hands hovering uncertainly over the keys. "You're sad, Mr. Fallon," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Reese, who was standing by the window with his arms crossed, didn't turn. "I'm fine, Alara. We're here to work. Let's begin with the opening bars." "But you said music is a feeling," she persisted, her brow furrowed. "If you feel sad, the music will be sad. Sometimes life requires us to perform a task, regardless of how we feel," he said, his voice flat. "That is a lesson you will have to learn." Now, play from her observation post in the darkened art history room. Vivian watched the exchange, a knot tightening in her stomach. This was her doing. She had mistaken a delicate organic process for a simple transaction. She had paid for a service, and now she was receiving it. But in doing so, she had killed the very magic she had sought to possess. True to her word, she had made the calls. Leo Fallon's application to the Rising Stars Academy was now pending review, and a renowned art instructor had been dispatched to his apartment for private portfolio sessions, all funded by a discreet Nexus Innovate educational grant. Vivian had fulfilled her side of the bargain, yet she kept returning to the school at night, compelled to watch. She told herself she was monitoring her investment, but the truth was more complicated. She was watching the consequences of her actions unfold. 2 days later, the final piece of the puzzle arrived. Donovan's email was marked with the highest level of security classification. The subject line contained a single word, Falcone. Vivian opened the file. Subject Reese Fallon, formerly Ricardo Falcone. The screen lit up with a ghost. A black and white photo of a young man in a tuxedo, his hair dark and wild, his eyes burning with an intense, joyful fire. He was sitting at a grand piano on a concert stage, his hands a blur of motion. Below the photo were press clippings from a decade ago. Falcone's Rachmaninoff's Duns Carnegie Hall, a virtuoso for the ages, the boy from nowhere with magic in his hands. Reese Fallon wasn't just a former pianist. He was Ricardo Falcone, a child prodigy who had exploded onto the international classical music scene. A sensation. Vivian scrolled down, her heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She read about his meteoric rise, his sold-out tours, his marriage to a promising young cellist named Elena. And then she reached the final entry. A police report, heavily redacted, but the core facts were there, cold and brutal. A date from 9 years ago. A single car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside of Philadelphia. Elena Falcone, pronounced dead at the scene. Riccardo Falcone, the driver, extracted from the wreckage with multiple injuries, the most severe being a compound fracture and catastrophic nerve damage to his right hand. His career was over. His wife was gone. The file noted that in the aftermath, hounded by the media, he had petitioned the court to have his and his young son's records sealed. He had legally changed his name, shedding the skin of the brilliant broken prodigy to become a ghost, a janitor, a man hiding from a life so filled with light that its absence had left him in permanent darkness. Vivian leaned back, the air leaving her lungs in a rush. The piano wasn't just a painful memory. It was a tombstone. It was the instrument of his glory and the catalyst for his ruin. His wife had been driving home with him from a concert that night, and Vivian, in her blind, selfish ambition, had taken a crowbar to that tombstone and pried it open, forcing him to look at the body inside. A wave of profound, sickening guilt washed over her. The ruthless CEO, the woman who prided herself on seeing every angle, had been completely, utterly blind. That night, she watched the lesson with new eyes. She saw the subtle way he favored his left hand. She saw the flicker of deep, unbearable pain in his eyes when Alara played a particularly beautiful, soaring passage. She saw a man performing an act of excruciating emotional sacrifice, and he was doing it for his son. But despite the tension, something was beginning to shift. Reese, bound by his promise, was finding a way to teach through his own pain. "That part you're playing," he said to Alara, his voice low. "It's a battle. Two forces pushing against each other. Can you hear it? The loud part and the soft part?" she asked. "Exactly," he nodded. "Don't just play them. Become them. Make your left hand the storm and your right hand the ship trying to sail through it. Let them fight." Alara tried again, and this time, the music had a pulse. It was conflicted, dynamic, and breathtakingly alive. For the first time, a flicker of the old Reese, the teacher, the storyteller, broke through the surface. Vivian stood in the dark, her hand pressed against her mouth. She had what she wanted. Alara was learning. The gala would be a success, but the victory was hollow, tainted by the knowledge of the price he was paying. She closed her eyes. The handsome, haunted face of Riccardo Falcone burned into her mind. She had started this as a negotiation. It had now become a question of absolution, and she had no idea how to earn it. Guilt was an inefficient emotion. It produced no quantifiable results and consumed valuable mental energy. Vivian had spent her entire career systematically eliminating it from her decision-making process. Yet now, it was a constant, leaden weight in her chest. The knowledge of who Reese Fallon used to be, and what she had forced him to become again, had changed the entire equation. She could no longer be a spy in the shadows. A few nights later, she found him on his dinner break. He wasn't in the staff lounge. He was sitting on a cold stone bench in the academy's deserted inner courtyard, eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag under the weak glow of a single security light. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than she'd noticed before. She approached him silently, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She held one out to him. "I thought you might need this," she said. He looked up, startled, his face immediately defaulting to a look of wary suspicion. He didn't take the cup. "What do you want now, Ms. Shaw?" "Nothing," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I'm not here to check on my investment. I'm here to apologize." The word hung in the cold night air between them. An apology from Vivian Shaw was as rare and improbable as a snowstorm in July. He stared at her as if she'd just started speaking a foreign language. "I was wrong," she continued, forcing the words out. They felt awkward, ill-fitting. "The way I handled this. Forcing your hand, using your son. It was a ruthless thing to do. I saw something I wanted for Alara, and I convinced myself that the ends justified the means. They didn't." She placed the coffee on the bench beside him. "I can't undo it, but I can say that I am sorry for the position I put you in." Reese watched her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He had expected threats, new demands, a tightening of the screws. He had not expected this. He had not expected a confession. Vivian looked away from his searching gaze toward the dark, imposing silhouette of the academy. "When my husband left, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It was deafening. I think I've been trying to fill it ever since. With work, with schedules, with lessons for Alara." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "I thought if I could just make her perfect, make her playing perfect, it would fix the quiet. I've been trying to fix her when I was the one who was broken." It was the most vulnerable, honest thing she had said to another human being in years. She was sharing a piece of her own story, not as a tactic, but as a peace offering. Reese was silent for a long time. He finally picked up the coffee cup, his fingers wrapping around its warmth. "She's a good kid," he said, his voice quiet. "She just needed someone to listen to the music she was already making inside." He didn't forgive her. He didn't absolve her. But he had, for the first time, engaged with her as an equal, as another parent, trying to navigate the messy, painful business of raising a child alone. A tiny crack had appeared in the wall between them. The lessons began to change. With the weight of Vivian's apology, however small, lifting a fraction of the bitterness from his heart, Reese found it easier to access the part of himself that was a teacher. He and Alara started crafting a story for the list piece. It was about a lost bird in a storm, fighting the wind and the rain, searching for its home. The loud, angry passages were the thunder. The fast, frantic sections were the beating of its wings, and the soft, melodic ending. That was the moment it saw the sun break through the clouds. Alara's playing transformed. It was no longer a technical exercise. It was an epic tale. Marcus Alcott, however, was not impressed. He caught Vivian in the hallway a week before the gala, having just overheard Alara's practice. "Vivian, a word," he said, his smile tight. "I just heard Alara. The piece is sounding rather dramatic, isn't it? Almost undisciplined. I trust Mrs. Gable is reining that in. We need precision and control for the gala, not melodrama." The old Vivian would have agreed, would have promised to tighten the reins. The new Vivian stiffened. "I think it's brilliant, Marcus," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "It's passionate. It's exactly what the performance needs." She walked away, leaving him momentarily speechless. She had chosen a side. Later that day, she made a call to Donovan, the art tutor for Leo Fallon. "Cancel the arrangement, Miss Shaw. The portfolio is nearly complete." "Cancel it," she repeated. "And the application to Rising Stars. Withdraw it." There was a pause. "May I ask why?" "Because it was a bribe," Vivian said quietly. "And I'm finished with that." Instead, she made a different call. She arranged an anonymous donation to Northwood Public's underfunded arts program, enough to hire a new teacher and buy supplies for 2 years. And she had Donovan track down a small, community-run art co-op in Reese's neighborhood, a place known for its nurturing atmosphere. She sponsored 3 months of classes for a promising young artist, leaving the name blank, to be filled by the co-op's director. It was an act of atonement, an attempt to give back without taking, to fix what she had broken in a way that wasn't a transaction. It was a quiet, anonymous apology, sent out into the world with no expectation of being heard. The night of the Founders' Gala arrived, cloaking the academy in a glittering facade of valet lights and evening gowns. The air buzzed with money and influence. Inside, Vivienne moved through the crowds, accepting compliments on her company's sponsorship and nodding to people whose names she barely registered. She was a flawless picture of corporate grace, but inside, her stomach was a tight knot of anxiety. The final lesson had taken place the night before. After Ilara had been picked up by her assistant, Vivienne had found Reese in the empty music room. He was standing by the piano, not touching it, just looking at it, his expression distant and unreadable. The truce between them was fragile, and Vivienne knew it couldn't hold the weight of the secret she was carrying. She had to confess. "I had my team look into your past," she said, the words blunt, stripped of any corporate doublespeak. "After you refused my first offer, I know who you are." Ricardo, his name, his real name, dropped into the silent room like a stone. He went rigid, his back to her, and for a long moment, he didn't move. She thought he might just walk out. "I know what happened," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "To your wife, to your hand. And I need you to know, I am not just sorry for forcing you to do this. I am so deeply sorry for your loss, for everything you lost." He finally turned, and his eyes were not filled with the anger she expected, but with a profound, soul-deep weariness. He looked at the sheet music for the Liszt piece still sitting on the piano. "She loved this piece," he said, his voice thick with memory. "Elena. She always said it sounded like my playing, all thunder and stubbornness until the very end." He gave a sad, faint smile. "She said the ending was the part I hadn't learned to live yet." It was an offering, a small, precious piece of his story, given freely. In that moment, the CEO and the janitor ceased to exist. They were just two people, a man and a woman, who understood the shape of grief, the sound of a life that had been irrevocably fractured. Now, backstage, the carefully constructed piece of the past few weeks was threatening to shatter. Ilara sat on a stool in a small dressing room, her velvet dress beautiful, her face pale with stage fright. Marcus Alcott swept in, his smile wide and predatory. "There she is, our little prodigy," he boomed. "Ready to bring the house down? Break a leg." He gave her a patronizing pat on the head and swept out again. The gesture, meant to be encouraging, did the opposite. Ilara began to tremble. "I can't," she whispered, her hands clenched in her lap. "Mom, I can't. There are too many people. I can't feel the story anymore. My hands are cold." Vivienne knelt beside her, her own heart hammering. She smoothed her daughter's dress, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Yes, you can, sweetheart. Just remember the story. Remember the bird." "I can't hear it," Ilara cried, her voice rising in panic. "It's just notes again." Just then, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Reese, in his janitor's uniform, holding a dustpan and brush. He looked up, as if surprised to see them there. "Sorry," he said, his eyes meeting Vivienne's for a fraction of a second. "Just cleaning up a spill." Alcott, who was hovering nearby, scowled. "This is a private area, Fallon. Get on with it." Reese ignored him. He walked over to Ilara and knelt, setting the dustpan aside. He gently took her trembling hands in his large, warm ones. "It's okay to be scared, Ilara," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the chaotic swirl of backstage nerves. "The bird was scared in the storm. Remember how we said the thunder made its heart beat fast? That's what you're feeling right now. It's not fear. It's the beginning of the music. Ilara's breathing began to slow. "You don't have to be perfect," he continued, his gaze holding hers. "You just have to be honest. The story is in your hands. It's been there all along. Close your eyes. Don't listen to the people. Listen for the heartbeat. Can you find it?" Ilara closed her eyes and nodded slowly. A deep breath, then another. "There it is," Reese whispered. He gave her hands a gentle squeeze and then stood up, picking up his dustpan. He gave Vivian a single, meaningful look before disappearing back into the corridor. Just another janitor doing his job. A stagehand called Ilara's name. Vivian walked with her to the edge of the curtain. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Ilara replied, her voice small but steady. She walked out onto the stage, a tiny, solitary figure in a vast pool of light. She found the piano, sat, and placed her fingers on the keys. A hush fell over the auditorium. Vivian and Reese stood just feet apart in the darkness of the wings, two silent, unseen guardians watching their two worlds collide. Ilara took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes were not the precise, crystalline sounds Alcott had been expecting. They were low, ominous, and full of a gathering tension. It was the sound of a storm brewing on a distant horizon. The audience, which had been politely expectant, leaned forward as one. This was not going to be a recital. It was going to be a story. The story Ilara told was devastatingly beautiful. The piano thundered with the fury of the storm, the notes cascading in a brilliant, chaotic torrent that was less about technical precision and more about pure, untamed power. The audience was holding its breath. This was not the playing of a child prodigy showing off her training. It was the sound of a human heart with all its fear and fight, laid bare. Vivian felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. She was watching her daughter fly. The piece shifted. The storm receded, replaced by a passage of such quiet, aching fragility that a collective sigh seemed to move through the auditorium. It was the bird, exhausted, wings heavy, lost but not broken. Then, slowly, a new theme emerged, a simple, hopeful melody that grew in strength and warmth until it filled the entire hall. It was the sun. It was home. When the final, peaceful chord faded into a perfect, shimmering silence, the room was completely still for a full 5 seconds. Then, the applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, measured clapping of a wealthy gala. It was a roar, a standing, thunderous ovation that felt like a force of nature in itself. People were openly weeping. The head of the Henderson Foundation was on his feet, applauding with a look of stunned reverence on his face. Backstage, Ilara practically fell off the bench and ran into the wings, straight into her mother's arms. Vivian caught her, lifting her off the ground in a hug that was fierce and full of a love she had never known how to show before. "I did it, Mom," Ilara whispered, her face buried in Vivian's shoulder. "I flew. You were magnificent," Vivian sobbed, her voice choked with pride. "You were a storm and a sunrise, all at once." Reese stood a few feet away, a silent observer, his face etched with a complex mix of pride and old sorrow. Ilara pulled away from her mother and turned, her hand outstretched into the space between them. "Thank you, Mr. Fallon," she said, her voice clear and strong. Before he could respond, Marcus Alcott bustled over, his face a mask of forced enthusiasm. "Marvelous, Ilara. Simply marvelous. A bit unorthodox, of course, but the donors seem to have loved it." He glanced at Reese, his eyes narrowing with suspicion and annoyance. "Fallon, what are you still doing here?" "There's a spill in the main lobby." Vivian straightened up, her arm protectively around her daughter. She looked directly at Alcott, her gaze so cold and sharp it made him flinch. "He's with me," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "And his name is Mr. Falcone. You will address him as such." The shock on Alcott's face was immensely satisfying. Vivian then looked at Reese, at the man who had given her daughter back her voice, and her eyes conveyed a universe of gratitude, respect, and a nascent hope she was too afraid to name. He held her gaze, and for the first time, the ghost of Riccardo Falcone, the artist, the husband, the man full of joy, looked back at her. He gave a slow, small nod. It was enough. A month later, The Harrington Academy's glossy brochure announced the launch of the Elena Falcone Program for Adapted Musical Arts, generously endowed by Nexus Innovate. The program's director was a new hire, a quiet, thoughtful man named Reese Fallon. His official bio was brief, stating only that he was a celebrated music educator with a focus on intuitive learning. On the program's first day, Vivian walked into the old music room. It was no longer a sterile, intimidating space. The lighting was softer, the chairs were arranged in a friendly circle, and the walls were covered in colorful drawings made by the students. Reese, no longer in a janitor's uniform but in a simple, comfortable blazer, was sitting on the floor with a small group of children, one of whom was in a wheelchair. He was teaching them rhythm by having them tap on small hand drums. In a corner, Leo was sketching in a notebook, a confident, happy smile on his face. He was flourishing in his classes at the Community Art Co-op. Near him, Ilara was helping a younger, newly enrolled blind student find middle C on the piano, her hands gently guiding his. Vivian stood in the doorway, watching. This was the sound that filled the silence now. It wasn't the sound of perfection or precision. It was the slightly chaotic, wonderfully messy, and joyful sound of healing. Reese looked up and saw her. He excused himself from the group and walked over, a real, unguarded smile on his face. "The ending," Vivian said softly, her heart full. "You learned how to live it." "Turns out it wasn't an ending," he replied, his voice low. "It was just a quiet part in the middle of the song." He looked at their children, at the new life humming in the room he had once only cleaned. "We're writing the next part now." His hand found hers, his work-roughened fingers lacing through her own. It wasn't a dramatic storybook romance. It was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more real. A partnership built not on a flawless performance, but on the shared understanding of a beautiful, imperfect, and finally hopeful song. So, that's the end of our story. I really hope a piece of it stays with you. If there was a moment, or even just a character that really hit home, I'd honestly be honored to read about it in the comments. It's just amazing to see how one story can land in so many different ways. Look, if you believe stories like this are a kind of light we need in the world, your support means everything. When you like and subscribe, you're doing more than just helping a channel grow. You're really casting a vote for stories that aren't afraid to look at what makes us human, and you're helping that light find someone who might be in the dark. Thank you for lending me your time. It means a lot. Until the next chapter, take care of yourselves and each other.